chapter 7 gets into everyone's favorite topic, or one of our favorite topics, about culture. And when you learn a new language, that you're learning a new culture. And instead of just thinking linguistically, now you're thinking more socially, and the importance of learning a culture when you learn a second language. I think when I think of learning Arabic, for example, I really would think I might be able to learn Arabic, but I know that I'm going to have to study the culture to really use it. Or when I think about Japanese or Chinese, any culture really, we should be thinking that it's not enough to just learn the linguistic aspects of a language. We really have to know in the society, how to, the politeness, whether it's noisy or quiet type of people, and how to talk to people who are older. And this is all definitely part of being able to use this language, as we were saying. Some cultures are very different than your culture, so that's going to be a bigger adjustment. And then other cultures, if they're similar, supposedly that is going to be an easier adjustment. Although sometimes you think a culture is similar to yours, and kind of deceptive, because it is going to have different values and some different norms. So you never really want to underestimate the difference in culture, when you're dealing with that. And the otherwise, in terms of what is culture, and we have to think about people's values, foods they're eating, all of the ceremonies of funerals and weddings, family values. One of the big values that comes up in the chapter is a collectivist society versus an individualistic type society. And because American culture is so individualistic, we're kind of used to being by ourselves a lot, or studying by ourselves, eating, kind of being studying by ourselves. And sometimes when you go into a collectivistic culture, you're just always around people, and it's very important, the people that you're with, and it's sometimes you feel like you're never alone, kind of. But that's one of the values in that culture, and that can relate to studying together and living together, in that community as well. Stereotypes always come in. We all have stereotypes of other countries, which are overgeneralizations, basically, of what people are like in that country. And those are usually negative. I mean, it could be a positive stereotype, but we just have to be careful of any stereotypes, even positive ones, like that those people work hard or study hard or are attractive. Even those can kind of lead us in the wrong way, but especially the negative stereotypes and prejudices, basically. The other issues come into play if you're going to a culture where men and women have different roles than your culture, then that's going to be definitely a big thing to understand, the roles there. You might go into a society that has different very distinct classes, and upper class, middle class, lower class, and that, if you're not used to that, that's something you'll have to learn as you go into the new culture. When students are learning a foreign language, sometimes they don't feel culture is going to be as big a deal. But when you study abroad, that's when you really get through the culture shock, or as they say, like the 4 stages of culture shock, or maybe more aptly put, like the 4 stages of cross-cultural adjustment. Because the shock part could be like the second stage when you start feeling the shock. But the 4 stages, obviously first you're in the high point, like the vacation type phase or honeymoon phase. When you first get to that culture, everything's good and interesting. And then as you start to get homesick and you start to not like aspects of the culture, or it begins to feel more normal, then you have the shock or even hatred of the culture. And as you come out of that, start to adjust into the 3rd phase. And then the 4th phase is when you actually feel at home, and kind of, you might even feel part of that culture. One thing that's very different is when someone immigrates to another country, they're in a very different situation than just like an international student. Some people immigrate, especially refugees, and they may not even really like the new culture that much. They're pretty much stuck in it. They would have preferred to stay home. But sometimes refugees and some immigrants, sometimes not only do they maybe have a negative feeling toward the culture, but the culture might have a negative view of them coming in. So now you get into a lot of social issues that have to do with part of the culture and the learning process. Again, what culture you're coming from is going to have a different dynamic going into whatever culture that you're going into. As we said, learning a language is learning a culture. You can't separate it. You can't separate those because they're all going to be together. Some cultures too are kind of closed to outsiders, so it can be really hard to go into certain cultures that have that closeness, and they don't really welcome you in as much. Whereas other cultures immediately bring you into their culture and show you around and host you. So that it's going to affect your experience as well. Do we teach students culture? Well, you don't really see it necessarily in an ESL book. You don't always see a lesson on culture, but it's mostly language issues. But sometimes it's in there. Handshakes or tipping, tipping across cultures, dating, like some cultures that have dating and some cultures don't. So you will see some cultural issues in language books, and it's always good to talk about those and focus on those. Of course, we talk a lot about our cultures just for conversation practice as well, and because that becomes interesting to talk about in the class. So those are some of the cultural issues that come up in Chapter 7. And like I said at the beginning, it's of a lot of interest to people because we love people who learn foreign languages. Languages are usually travelers and really interested in culture. And once you really start using a language, then you realize that learning the culture is one of the keys to kind of showing respect for people and getting respect, and then as we're trying to actually function, in this new language.